And we're supposed to have a campfire set up where the guide is for today.
All of them are correct. Remember I told you before about the aurora belt? So this kind of a ring around the North Pole. So that means that when the northern lights are happening, whether it's now or 100 years ago, it was mostly on this ring. So that means in places like Norway, but also Finland, Sweden, Russia, Siberia, Greenland, Alaska, Canada, and then if it was stronger in places like Italy, France, the UK, the United States, and in these places there is a lot of indigenous communities, whether it's Samis, Inuits, very different indigenous communities and very different answers to the questions that we might have. What is going on? What is this? And some of them were more on the fear side, true. Some of them were more on the joy. But there is many legends about the Northern Lights, still to this day. For example, in Norway, the Sami communities there, you guys have heard about the Sami here, the indigenous communities of the Scandinavian countries. So Norway, Sweden, Finland, Northern Lights, especially when they were strong. To this day, if you had very strong Northern Lights activity, Sami communities, they don't go out. They don't go out from their houses and they don't let the kids to go out. Because in Alaska, in Canada, and even in Greenland, a lot of people also believe that there were spirits in the skies, but they didn't believe that they were bad spirits. They just believed that it was the ancestors. So we have this whistle story in different places, and probably the reason for this is that a lot of people believe that when you have a very strong activity, the Northern Lights make a noise that is similar to a whistle. And for many years, a lot of scientists said that there was no reason for the Northern Lights to make a noise. It was probably because people saw them in places around the snow, that cracks, or around the fjords. But there has been a paper recently that shows that maybe actually the Northern Lights can make a noise when it's very strong, and it has to be quite complex, but with atmospheric pressure and the difference between the Northern Lights, the wind, and the atmosphere. The Vikings also saw the Northern Lights, and they believed that it was the reflection of the shields of the Valkyrias. The Valkyrias were these women warriors that will take all the warriors that had fallen in the fights. They will take them with them up in the skies, and when you could see Northern Lights, that was the reflection of the shields. But there are also stories that are linked to animals. And here we are in Finland. The most famous story is in Finland is the revontulet. That's the way in Finnish to call the Northern Lights, revontulet. And revontulet means the fire foxes. During the day he looks just like a fox, but during the night he became magical. And the reason why he was magical, the story says it was because the moon gave this fox supernatural powers. Sweden, a bit similar. Fishermen believed that the Northern Lights were good luck for them to find banks of herrings and fishes. So the reflection of these fishes would go up in the skies. So also good omen. So yeah, we can imagine actually that the fire here is our sun, this star that is in the solar system. And this sun is very warm. And all around the sun there is something that we call the corona. That's the outer layer of the atmosphere of the sun. And in this corona, there are superheated gases, electrons, protons, there is plasma as well. And there is a constant flow getting away from this corona of these electrons, these protons, and this is what we call the solar wind. So here for our story, we can imagine that the solar wind is the smoke. And as you can see, it's going in all directions, mostly on my direction. It's going on all directions, right? And this is exactly what the solar wind is doing. It's going on all directions of the solar system. It can take about 2 to 5 days to reach the Earth. Let's say that this is the day side and this is the night side, right? We have the smoke, so the solar wind coming on my direction. And what we have is the electromagnetic, the magnetic field, the magnetic lines around the Earth. So yeah, those lines are converging polar and south poles. But sometimes when the solar wind is very strong and there is a lot of energy, it manages to penetrate the magnetic lines. And then what happens? Different things. It might happen that it's going to penetrate on the day side, and then of course the solar wind is going to follow the movement of these magnetic lines. Remember where they converge in the south and in the south poles. So that means that we might have northern lights during the day as well, but we don't really see them. And what happens here? So the solar wind that's going to arrive is going to stretch these magnetic lines on the night side. It's going to stretch them very, very strong, and at some point they are going to break. And when they break and they reconnect again, they create a lot of energy. And then it's a little bit like pulling a rubber band. It's going to bounce back, right? And this is exactly what is happening. So the magnetic lines are going to be pulled apart like this, and then they're going to break and come back. And when they come back, the northern lights start going on the night side. And they are going to be pulled to the weak points of these magnetic lines on the north and on the south. So the solar wind is doing like this, arrives on the atmosphere, and that's where the magic happens. It's not only the solar wind, it's the interaction between the solar wind and the atoms of our atmosphere. Because when it reaches the atmosphere, the gases that we have here, which is mostly oxygen and nitrogen, the atoms get excited, and when they come back to their ground state, they release what we call a photon, a particle of light. So when we see the northern lights, remember what we saw at the beginning as well? We see kind of a movement, sometimes even a shape, but these are actually millions and millions of atoms going on and off, on and off, on and off. And it creates these shapes, creates this movement when there is movement as well. And the most common shape is the one that you guys saw tonight, the arch. Remember that arch? And those arches are actually forming even tonight here as well, and low horizon, I think it's still there. These arches are following the magnetic lines. So it's something that is usually invisible, becomes visible because of the northern lights. And then some nights you also get some more like weird shapes. I think you guys maybe saw that. It's kind of vortex kind of thing. And those are, remember, these magnetic lines that broke and then bounced back? This is the kind of effect that it makes. And that's the reason why it also has this shape. And then we also have different colors. We already mentioned that closer to the equator we see mostly the reds. But if I had to draw a curtain of colors, of northern lights colors, I would say that in the very bottom we have pink. Not always visible, but we have pink. And those are nitrogen atoms that are being excited by the solar wind. Then we have the most common one, that's green. That's what we saw tonight. And those are oxygen atoms in lower parts of the atmosphere. Pink, green, and on top of the green we have the red. That's very hard to see with the naked eye, mostly visible on camera, for oxygen atoms, but on higher parts of the atmosphere. So the oxygen is actually less dense on that part, and that's the reason why it's more rare to see the reds. We need a lot of solar wind to come on the Earth. And then on top of that, we would have some kind of blue-purple, and that's nitrogen again. So yeah, pink, green, red, purple. And the reason why people closer to the equator only see the reds, or mostly the reds, has to do with how you see the horizon. They are actually only seeing the upper parts of the northern lights, because the lower parts they cannot see it because it's below the horizon line. doesn't mean that they are not having the green part, it's just that they cannot see it. Hard to explain, but it's a little bit as if you were on top of the mountain and maybe you don't have the same view over the horizon as if you are on the bottom of the valley, right?
Quite disappointing. Oh wells.